Hey everyone, welcome back to the OPEX Podcast where fitness is explained. I am your host, Robbie Burke, and I'm joined on today's show by OPEX coach, Mike Bann. On this episode, Mike and I have a discussion around the assessment module on the CCP Level 1 course. Here, Mike outlines the assessments utilized within OPEX Move 1 and OPEX Move 2. This was a great conversation with Mike, guys. I know you're going to love it. Stay with us. All right, Coach Mike Bann, it is great to catch up with you again, my man. So just for the audience, what's been new with yourself? Have you been doing a lot of traveling? How's the study going? Catch us up.
Yeah, this is my first week of summer break, so nothing new with regards to like anything. Just trying to not actually fill my void with stuff. I'm actually trying to practice what I preach and allow myself to have downtime. So I haven't done a single research review. I've read a little bit this week, but not a lot. Usually I read 3 to 5 hours a day, and I'm like, I'm out. I'm just putting my books down, and I'll listen to an audiobook when I drive. But otherwise, I've just had a lot of downtime and just try to stare at a wall, like just try to relax and like meditate and calm my system down. So that's pretty much what's new. No traveling. I'm going to a conference next month, and then I fly to Australia for 2.5 weeks, and I'll be out there teaching and whatnot.
What conference?
Ancestral Health Symposium in Bozeman, Montana.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm pretty excited for that one. Yeah.
Is
every year.
I thought that was later on in the year. Was that not like in Seattle, like last October?
Yeah, so it was in Seattle last September, and this year it's in Bozeman, and it changes every year. So I go every year. It's a lot of fun. Hopefully I get to see some people out there that may be listening in or watching this podcast.
Cool. And did you find last year's one good?
Oh, I loved it. Yeah, it's fantastic. I like it because it's geared more towards like the clinician and the professional, whereas, Paleo FX is not. So I'm more partial to Ancestral Health Symposium just because it's a lot of data, it's a lot of research, it's a lot of talking to different physicians and scientists and clinicians, and it's a great way to elevate your understanding of how to design great programs.
Lalonde still presents that, Matt Lalonde. Does he still present?
He wasn't there last year. I don't think he's presenting this year. I looked at the lineup and I didn't see his name, but I could have missed it.
Yeah. Sure, listen, you should fill your void now with exercise. Why don't you just train like a mad thing for the next few weeks?
I mean, I exercise every day. I lift intensely only 3 days a week, and then the rest of the time I either walk 10,000 steps in a day, which is like 5 miles, or I do row repeats. Like today I'll go do row repeats as soon as I'm done coaching, and then I'll go hit my sauna. I have a sauna that I hit. I'll usually hit the sauna for 30 minutes to an hour. But I'm going to try and not add extra stuff in. I'm going to try really, really hard.
But that's not going to get you to the games, Bann. Come on, man.
No, it definitely won't. And I'm okay with that.
All right. So listen, you are the head of OPEX assessment, which is broken down into body, move, and work. And what I like to cover is the move section, which is then further broken down into move 1 to 4. So basically, it's the what would you say? It's the client's initial sort of entry when they come into a CCP program. So do you maybe just want to take us through what is OPEX Move, what's involved, and maybe we'll cover what's involved in OPEX 1 and 2.
Yeah. Well, the movements, it's just a screen really. So we just look at some primal patterns, if you want to call it that, and based on that, we decide whether or not, as coach, the coach decides whether or not you're ready to progress forward. So we'll look at the air squat, which basically is similar to the FMS. We're just going to look at a hands overhead, and then we're going to look at a normal air squat. If anything, it's actually more similar to the SFMA. We'll look at a step-up test. We'll look at a split stance inline lunge, inline lunge 90-90. We'll look at active straight leg raise. We'll look at a toe touch. We'll look at a modified scratch. So instead of doing 2 hands at once, break it down into 1 at a time. We'll break it down into some like core components where we'll look at side plank, front plank, or front bridge, however you want to call it, and then a glute bridge and isolateral glute bridge. Yeah, single leg glute bridge. Sorry. And then from there, we break it down into the parts. So let's look at your air squat. Can you air squat? No. Let's figure out why. What part is not working properly or not optimized to get you into an air squat? So maybe it's motor control. Maybe it's ankle dorsiflexion. Maybe it's some form of core control. Maybe you just aren't built to air squat or squat at all. Like maybe you just don't have the bone structure and you should never do ass to grass squats. So what we use from that data is we start to break down how to correct it, how to improve upon it when we need to. And sometimes people don't need to. You know, if you're 75, I don't really need you to be squatting ass to grass. I need you to get out of your chair, get back in your chair, etc. So that's the first movement. And then the second one is more looking at dynamic movement without load. So first is always without movement, and then we have movement but without load. And so that's looking at like a rear foot elevated split squat unloaded, looking at push-ups, pull-ups, stuff like that. And then we can use the same principles of breaking patterns down into their parts and say, okay, well, you're having a hard time with the push-up. Why is that? Is it because your triceps aren't strong enough and you can't extend your elbow? Is it your core? You can't actually plank very well, so you push and you do the worm. So yeah, you like that? That's my minor in dance right there, the worm.
Nice. You crack that one out on Saturday nights?
Sometimes. Yeah.
I call this the repeller. It repels all females. Just getting a little bit deeper though into move one there. So just in my notes here, we have toe touch, scratch chest as you alluded to, back straight leg raise, a step up, an air squat, split squat, and then we have front prone supine and side plank. Why those particular movements? Maybe we could just go through those, starting off with the toe touch. What exactly are we looking for there?
Yeah, I look for bilateral symmetry. So I'm looking for the ability to touch your toes, legs locked out, and I'm looking to see if we're not having a massive hip shift. So some people, when they go to touch their toes, they'll shift because they can't sit into one hip or the other. And so I'm looking to see if that's an issue. And then with that, I'll correlate that with what your air squat might look like, an active straight leg raise, etc. So you'll see sometimes, not all times, but sometimes somebody does a squat and they shift into their right hip. And then you watch their toe touch and they shift into their right hip. And so you start putting these dots together and you're like, yeah, you know what? You don't really sit into your left hip very well. Let's figure out how we can do that to optimize your performance. If we're talking about just general fitness and pain, then maybe we don't even touch it. But if we're talking about performance, physics matters. We got to make sure that the bar's in a good spot. So I will fix it based on performance parameters. We'll correlate it with the active straight leg raise. Let's say you can't flex your left hip as much, so you lift up your left leg and it's like here and your right leg's here. We can take all these data points and say, okay, this is the common thing that we're seeing. This is the theme. We're going to basically build out our correctives around that, and we're going to start to correct that issue. And then we're going to retest, in 4 weeks or whatever to see if we got stronger or whatever.
And just in regards to the toe touch there, is that a prerequisite for deadlifting in regards to OPEX move?
Yeah, usually it is. I really try not to deadlift people if they can't touch their toes, at least full range of motion. The thing is, though, there's movements, there's a lot of gray area. And so when I teach movement, like when I teach brand new coaches, I kind of have to be black and white just because I have to give them something to hold on to. But what I try to teach them over the years of their education is, hey, there's a lot of gray. There's like 5,000 shades of gray here, and we got to live in the gray. We don't want to be black. We don't want to be white, but we want to live in the middle. So there are times that I'll deadlift somebody that can't touch their toes, and I'm totally fine with it. But when you come through CCP and you're a brand new, hey, I just started coaching and I want to make it a profession, I've got to kind of put my foot down and I got to say, okay, like this is how you're going to do it right now. But in 5 years, you're going to come back and I'm going to turn your world upside down and tell you that you don't actually have to necessarily do it like that. So deadlift progressions can come from that. Whereas, maybe you can't touch your toes, but I can give you a sumo deadlift with a kettlebell, or I can give you a trap bar deadlift, or I can give you rack pulls. I can give you RDLs. There's a lot of things we can do. Yeah. Maybe I don't give you the conventional closed stance deadlift.
Yep.
That's the starting point.
Yeah. So basically, as Charlie Weingroff would say, you lateralize or regress.
Yeah. Just shift this way and go that way. I call it course correction, but yeah.
Yeah. So with the scratch test, you do it slightly differently to the FMS, a little more like the SFMA one. what would that be a prerequisite of? Like, what would that tell you in terms of program design?
So let's look at the scratch, like from the SFMA standards. You got to be able to touch, over here. You got to be able to touch that part of your scap. I'm also looking at the angle of the humerus. So if you, for example, like I can touch here, but this is my arm. If I was to straighten this out, I'm way out in front. So maybe it's not a good idea to start doing bilateral overhead movements. Whereas if I can get the humerus or the elbow to point straight up, I can touch the spot. I, lift out, boom, I'm in a good position. I also would look at the degree of elbow flexion, because let's just, like, if you're a super dieseled out dude and you just got really big arms, like if you're like Paula Quinn, for example, you're probably going to have some limited elbow flexion, and that might be the limiting factor behind this.
Just saying, hey, Charles. Hi, Charles.
Yeah. So you may be limited, and so you could go overhead just fine. So we're looking at not only the ability to touch and like pass fail that, but we're looking at the qualitative side of it. So it's like, hey, yeah, you're not able to really do this, but it's because you've got, 20-inch guns. So we're still going to let you go overhead. The behind the back one, we're looking at the ability to basically put yourself into a massive range of motion here. So for like competitive CrossFit or fitness, we're doing a lot of muscle ups. If this is like you and you can't do this, it's probably not a good idea to start doing 30 muscle ups per time in intensity after you're fatigued from doing 200 burpees. So we're just looking at basically taking the patterns of fitness that we see, muscle ups, snatches, split jerks, etc., and we're breaking those patterns down into their constituent parts, and we're isolating those variables. So we're saying, hey, this here kind of correlates with an ability to do this. This here correlates with the ability to do a lot of plyometrics like burpees. Like, I think a lot of people don't recognize that the burpee is a plyometric, and we're just prescribing burpees to people who have horrible ranges of motion in their shoulder, and we're asking them to absorb rapid amounts of force. So we want to make sure that this shoulder has at least the range of motion to do that.
So then active straight leg raise, another one from the FMS. What are we looking at there, and what sort of movements would that be a prerequisite of?
I look at it as hip separation. So I'm looking at pure hip separation in a more stable platform. So when you look at a lunge, that's hip separation. When you look at a split jerk, that's hip separation. A step up, that's hip separation. Hurdle step, hip separation. All of it's the same thing to me. I'm looking at a very stable platform where the earth is giving you all of your stability. And then I'm looking at your ability to flex and maintain neutrality on the other side. So let's use running as an example. If you're doing the active straight leg raise and then you're here and you lift up and then your bottom foot turns out right away, maybe going into hip flexion isn't the best idea when you're sprinting, or you have to do hip flexion, but in sprinting, when you do that hip flexion, your other leg turns out and now you have an adductor tear. So I'm looking at the ability to separate the hips with good control in a non-dynamic environment. That's for like running mechanics. Whereas with the split jerk, I'm looking at it from the ability to get into that hip separation position and be stable overhead. So I see that pattern correlating to everything that's out there in fitness, including just the ability to flex the hip and extend the other one for grandma to walk up the stairs and not trip. So, or to like step over a curb or whatever it is. I also use it to look at like pitchers. Whenever I work with baseball pitchers, they've got to be able to lift one leg up, which means they can get hip flexion and then they can lunge down towards home plate. So I use that pattern to kind of see, can you do this in a controlled environment? If you can't, you may not be able to do it in a sporting environment. It's not always the truth. Like, there are many cases where you can't do something in a controlled environment, but then when you load it up, you're fine. But it gives some clues to being like, what's going on here? Do I need to investigate deeper? So for me, it's just a screen. It's just basically saying, hey, we're not able to do this right now. That might impact us in program design. Yeah, it's over the years, just investigating it, I actually see it more as adverse neural tension, so neurodynamics. So, coaches need to start digging into that stuff, over time, just because we can't refer every single person that can't do an active straight leg raise to the PT. So I give a lot of I see and give a lot of sciatic nerve stuff. So slump sciatic nerve glides and slides, supine, side lying, a bunch of stuff like from Michael Shacklock, basically. If you read or if you read David Butler's The Sensitive Nervous System, a lot of that stuff should go into the program. So I see that active straight leg raise, and the first thing that goes through my head is, okay, what's the peripheral nervous system doing? Because if we're going to sprint with intensity, you're going to tear a muscle or a tendon before you tear a nerve, right? You're going to prioritize your nerve before you prioritize your tendons. You can still run if you tear a hamstring. You can't run if you tear a sciatic nerve, as an easy way to explain it. So I see that as the screen, and then I would dig in deeper and start looking at what's the peripheral nervous system like, what are breathing patterns like, are we starting to breathe with our paraspinals too much? You know, that's, to me, the active straight leg raise is just a hint that, hey, something may not be right. You need to figure out what it is.
Yeah, you see that an awful lot. And, you know, again, when sort of teaching the active straight leg raise, it's kind of differentiating between, is this motor control or is it mobility? And a lot of times just motor control. I mean, an easy way to suss that out is just to like passively move the individual's leg, and invariably like you can move it much further, but they actively can't because they just don't have that control. Usually, and you know yourself, they're the people who are in massive extension, ribs are flared up, pelvis is anteriorly tilted, and then they have all that neural tension or you know, whatever it is, chronicity in the posterior chain, and their active ability to control their leg raise is poor, and then if you can passively move it much further, that kind of gives you an indicator it's more motor control.
Yeah.
The step up, Bann, I have a question there on that. So we're talking about the step up test now, or assessment. What height is the box at? Tibial tuberosity?
Pretty much.
All right.
Yep.
Just wondering.
But it's a tough one for folks, because let's say you have a 24-inch box or a 20-inch box or a 30-inch box. Like, you're not going to find anyone that could use a 30-inch, hopefully, but it may not be perfect. So I would prefer to use the Atlantis step up, because it's modifiable.
Yeah.
Like, I can actually move it up and down. Or if you have to, you just grab a bunch of plates and you stick a PVC pipe down the hole of the plate so the plates don't slide or whatever. And then you go with that. But yeah, ideally tibial tuberosity.
Yeah, it's good. Yeah. And so what exactly are we looking for with that?
With that one, I'm just looking to see how much do you have to push off the ground. So if you're that person that like tries to step up and you have to like drive off that bottom foot, that tells me something. I'm looking to see where you're putting your weight through. So are you putting your weight through the forefoot, the heel? What's going on there? I'm looking to see, are you folding forward because you're too quad dominant and you basically need to drive off your quad? I'm looking to see, are you tilting kind of like a modified Trendelenburg? So like the second you do this, do you do one of these? So I'm looking for any deviation from the ability just to basically stand up. Now, there's always going to be some level of push off the ground. I very rarely see anyone that can just straight lift their leg up and then drive up. But I'm looking for like big red flags there. I'm looking for, wow, that's big difference between left and right. We need to figure that out.
Yeah, I think you brought up a good point there, in that you're looking for major red flags, because I know that I was guilty of this, and maybe you were too when you first started coaching, and I'm sure that you see it like I've seen it all the time with beginner coaches, is that like, you know, like, is that, and you're just kind of like trying to explain to them, listen, look for gross issues like gross asymmetries or gross movement dysfunction. You don't try and pick like the flies off the shit, as Mike Boyle would say. And you're looking for like, whoa, that like it should be as clear as day to you.
Yeah. If it doesn't look athletic, it's not.
That's a good way of putting it.
Yeah.
All right, the air squat. I mean, what exactly are we looking for there with the air squat? You know, so take us through that.
Yeah, when you're doing the air squat, I don't care about toes straight forward or turned out. I want you comfortable. So that's where I differentiate it from, like, you know, the FMS or, you know, an SFMA. I just, if you're not going to squat with your toes straight forward with a bar on your back, why do I have to test it without a bar on your back? It just doesn't make sense to me. So I just want to see where you can squat comfortably with your hands overhead. Can your thumbs stay behind your toes? And can your tibia be parallel to your torso? So if your shins are parallel to your chest, we're pretty good. I'm also looking for motor control. Like, are you all in the heels? Are you all on the toes? What's going on there? Because there are people that can cheat that system, right? They're like super hyper flexible ankles. And so they can have their shins like all the way forward, but their torso straight up. So even though they can get full depth, I can see that their natural inclination for movement is maybe a way that I wouldn't necessarily want them to move under load. So I'm not just looking to say, hey, this is a 1, 2, or a 3 or 0 if you have pain, but I'm looking to kind of see how can I adjust this to make you perform at your best with this pattern. Now, if you can't do that, I'll have you put your hands out in front or behind your ears. And I've switched it kind of over the years from going behind the neck, because I saw a lot of people cranking. When you go from behind the ears, you don't really have anything to crank on. So that was like one of the major shifts that I had. But otherwise, yeah, elbows forward, hands out in front, whatever it is, and then squat. Can we get parallel shins to torso? Or are we here? Or are we here? Or are we here? So it just gives me some insight into what could be going on. Again, there's thousands and thousands and thousands of times in my career now, having done all of these assessments over the years, I see people that can't pass the air squat, but they can squat just fine. So I hesitate to say that you can't squat somebody just because you can't do the air squat. I've seen it countless times where once we load you up, you're squatting beautifully, but without load, not so much. So case in point, kettlebell rack squat, goblet squat, front squat. We add that in and all of a sudden you're squatting great, but your air squat was dog shit. Maybe I don't have to be so dogmatic about it.
Yeah,
so
my air squat is dog shit, but then when I squatted load, I look a lot better.
Yeah, and I kind of look at it from like the FMS perspective. Like if you can't do an overhead squat, like if you can't get a 1, maybe we don't squat. Like that's kind of what was taught to me when I first started doing the FMS. Like even like Gray and Lee Burton taught my FMS course, and they were saying that, and a lot of respect for them. But what if you have a shoulder injury and you just can't actually do this because your shoulder's injured? Am I never ever going to squat you? Of course not. I might box squat you. I might front squat you. I might safety bar squat you. So again, I try to keep everything within context. So maybe you can't do this, but there's ways we can work around it and make it work for you. So we don't really have rules per se. We have like boxes like pass or fail. But over time, I challenge all of the coaches that I teach to basically start thinking within the gray. When you're brand new, you have to be like very black and white because they need something to latch onto.
Yeah.
But after they get done with CCP and they do their case study or they come to immersion, they need to understand how to live in the gray. And that's what we really try to teach.
So you've taken FMS, but you know this just for the audience sake. Like the reason why they have feet straight forward in the squat is 2 reasons, but one main one is just to standardize the screen. That's why. So if someone's doing it in Australia and someone's doing it in Ireland, that the screen's been done the same way all the time. Because if you're going to have something to the masses, it needs to be standardized. But as you know, they'd never say you have to squat like that in training. It's just for standardized the test. The other reason he said one time is it does give you a window into maybe internal rotation in the hip. It might give you some windows up, but mainly to standardize the test.
Yeah, I would challenge that though. You standardize that test. That's no different than when we teach kids or like people like me, for example, that, you know, have learning challenges where like I learn a certain way. You standardize this and all of a sudden now you're saying if you don't fit this mold, it doesn't work. So let's look at like the SAT, right? It's a standardized test, but there's a lot of geniuses out there that might not do well in the SAT and they should still go to college or whatever. So I see that standard. It doesn't sit well with me because there's plenty of times people cannot uphold that standard no matter what. And they're phenomenal athletes. They don't get hurt. They don't have pain and they crush it. So that's where I took a step back and I was like, maybe we don't have to have standardized just because in the real world, people move differently, like bone structures. Like I'll take note of it. Yeah, you can't do that. Okay. What does that really tell me? It tells me maybe I don't squat you with your toes forward. But I think marketing is big. And when you want to market something, I think you're absolutely right. Like you have to have that standard, but I think it just creates this misconception that we have to be black or white. And we're trying to teach all of our coaches to live in the gray.
But Gray wouldn't disagree with that, neither would Lee. And as you said there, if someone does it and they can't do it, it just says that they can't do it. And then Gray and Lee would say, well, the screen just told you they can't do it. That's all the screen was meant to tell you. It's just you'll get people who will take the FMS and they don't understand that. But like Gray and Lee were like, we never said that like this was like black or this was white. We're like, yes, we understand there's gray and there's context.
Yeah, I think I forget who told me it. It was probably one of my Sifus. He basically said you take a group of masters and you put them in a room, they will agree on everything. Mm-hmm. You take all of their students and you put them in a room, they will disagree on everything.
Yeah.
So like Lee and Gray, Greg Rose, Kyle Kiesel, all those guys would probably be like, hey, there's a lot of gray out there. But what we're trying to do is we're trying to teach our coaches that come through our system to not be gray, to not be black and white. We're trying from the get-go, hey, you got to have context behind everything.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So moving on to the split squat, the old just 1990 split squat. Why that? What are we looking for? And another thing I'd like to ask about is the rib position. Like when you're getting someone to execute this, are you like coaching them up on rib, or do you just want to see like their raw split squat and then you just correct it as you go?
A few things. I actually will demonstrate it, and then I want to see if they can replicate it. So I want to see what their movement literacy is. That's what I would call it. Like, can you look at a movement and recreate it? Because that gives me some insight to your athleticism right out the gate. So if you can't, I already know where I have to go with the program. If you can, that tells me quite a bit. Now, on top of that, I'm looking to see, can we have good front end or front shin angle vertical 90-90? So here, 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 and then with the vertical torso. I'm not saying you have to load it that way. I just want to see, can you do that with your feet in line? So for me, that's just a more challenging hip separation pattern than, say, the active straight leg raise.
Yeah.
Right. So now we're looking at balance. The way we would look at that is we would just say, hey, listen, if you can't do hip separation and control your body weight down, maybe when you're decelerating to change direction, you might have a higher risk for ACL or anything like that. So that's where I come in with that. In terms of the split jerk, I very rarely see elite Olympic weightlifters not able to do that. But I don't usually see people that struggle with that pattern have great split jerks. So just looking at that and saying, hey, this is something I've seen anecdotally. I don't know of any data that's out there to provide that shows that this is how they all move. It's just been like, hey, these guys can split jerk, 150 kilos, and their split stance is always good. But these people, they have a tendency to not be able to do the split stance, and they tend to be the people that don't lunge forward. They basically just drive under and they push their foot back, but they don't drive their front leg forward in the split jerk.
Yeah.
So just some correlates that we've seen. But again, we're just looking to see if you can have that good hip separation. And that could relate to sprinting, deceleration, acceleration, split jerks, pitching. I've worked with pitchers that when they go into left hip flexion, they struggle. And when they have right hip flexion, they're better. And that actually has changed some of their mechanics in throwing. And so by trying to optimize that, they tend to be able to, like, hey, my back doesn't hurt when I throw anymore. Or I feel like I have a little bit more zip because I can lunge a little bit better. So I'm using that to kind of correlate to real world patterns like pitching or anything that requires hip separation.
2 questions with that. One thing I haven't asked so far is how many repetitions are you doing for each one of these?
3.
On all of them?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
If you can do it right away, then like I'm not worried about it. Like if you show me a perfect air squat right away, it's like I'm not looking at it again.
We're done. And then with the split squat, this is actually isn't the question, it's just more, do you observe this as well? It's so hard, isn't it, to get people to keep that back leg at 90, as in like your knee right under your hip, because it really puts a good stretch in the rectus femoris. Like people either do like, there's usually 2 main things they'll do. They'll flex the hip, or else they'll let that knee drift way behind their hip, and you're like, no, put the knee under the hip. And then when they're like, oh, I feel that. Like it's really hard to keep that 90-degree angle on that back leg, I think. Do you see that as well? Yeah.
Yeah, I do see that quite a bit. It doesn't necessarily mean anything negative to me. It just informs me like, yep, that's something that I might have to consider. Sometimes that means I give couch stretches or other types of quad stretches, Bretzel 2.0, whatever. I do see it quite a bit though, but it doesn't necessarily impact the design of the program. It's just like, hey, when you're going to do XYZ split jerk, maybe that's going to impact you because that whole movement chain of that muscle chain is tight. That's going to change your back ankle. So you're not going to be able to flare that heel out a little bit. You're going to have less stability, maybe, but it doesn't always mean that.
All right, the tried and trusted plank series. So we have prone, supine, and side plank. What are we looking for there, and what's the protocol time-wise?
90 seconds per, and I just want to see straight line from ear, shoulder, hip, knee, ankle.
Are you going 90 second on the side? Both sides?
Mm-hmm.
And then 90 second front and back?
Mm-hmm.
All right, sweet.
With the back, it's a little bit different. So I want to see, like, when you do a single leg glute bridge and your hips are up, if I have you lift that hip and you get hip separation again, do you drop? So it's like a supine modified Trendelenburg. I'm just looking to see where we start to lose motor control. So, and it's got to be gross. Like the biggest mistake I see coaches make is they're like, well, they dropped the hip a little bit. And it's like, don't worry about it. Whereas like if you see like leg come up and then they really drop, that tells me a ton. And it doesn't necessarily mean it's posterior chain. I see that a lot with core control. So then we start doing dead bugs on foam rollers. We start doing wall dead bugs on a foam roller. We start challenging some of that rotary component. And then we get them back into, a single leg glute bridge, and they have better control. And then they're like, wow, yeah, I can actually feel myself getting into my hip, etc. So it's not a 90-second for the single leg glute bridge. I don't want to see 90 seconds of a hold. I just want to see, can you lift up under control, back down, reset, come up, lift up, back down, reset.
All right, sweet. All right, finally, we'll just wrap up then on level 2, because there's only 3 assessments there to cover. So we have the push-up, the tried and trusted true push-up. I think you were talking about worm in there earlier on. So what exactly are we looking for with the push-up?
A moving plank. Really, that's it. I just want to see, can you go all the way down? Can you come all the way up? And can you just stay still? Do you look like this? Are you dive bombing, or are you down and up? I just want to see good control.
Why is that important?
And, for me, especially in sport performance, if you can't put force into the ground and then let that force come through the entire body to, say, rotate, hit a ball, to throw a ball, to tackle someone, whatever, even like golf, for example, if you don't have that ability to stiffen and create that force and let it transfer through the whole body, you're going to potentially dissipate from somewhere else. So maybe you're going to swing your golf club and then you hyperextend and you start having, some slide or sway or whatever. In terms of fitness, I look at that in the sense that we're doing a ton of burpees. And if we just don't have the ability to control our body with one single push-up, maybe we don't do burpees, right? If you can't do decent squats, or if you can't do decent lunges, maybe we don't sprint. And so I see it as the same, right? Sprinting is a plyometric, whether people want to admit it or not. It's a lot of contacts. And when you're really sprinting, you better make sure that you have good control. Whereas with burpees, coaches in CrossFit and just in fitness in general, they tend to not think about it like that. So I want to see good push-ups before I start throwing you into this position where I'm going to have you fall and basically prevent yourself from smashing your face by absorbing it into your shoulders and then popping back up. So that's why that push-up test is massively important to me.
So essentially, you're looking for a good, strong link between upper, lower, lower, upper in terms of energy transfer.
Yep, you got it.
And just going off what you said there about sprinting, that means there is a shit ton of people who should not be sprinting.
100%. Think about this. You go to this group fitness class and it's like, hey, day 1, we're going to have you run a mile. That doesn't make any sense. You're overweight, you're unhealthy, you haven't done any plyometrics.
Hey, no, I'm not. Excuse you.
So then I'm going to have you take 1,500 steps with intensity. That's out of this world. 1,500 steps is 750 single leg hops. Why am I going to take somebody that's brand new to fitness and have them do this 750 times and switch to their leg? You wouldn't do that. So yeah, running is a plyometric. It's not like maybe broad jumps or single leg hurdle hops or, depth jumps, but it's a plyo and it can mess some people up.
And you're also and depending on the individual and depending on who the author or the researcher read, you're putting about 5 to 7 times your body weight through your joints on one limb. Yeah.
So it's the same, but think about that now with the burpee. If that's just running, what happens when, I actually have to fall from 5-something feet and catch myself? It doesn't make sense to give people burpees when they can't do good push-ups.
You're not really falling from 5 feet though.
Well, it depends on how tall you are. I'm not thinking you're.
I know what you're saying though, yeah.
But if you're 5'9", if you're 5'9", 6 foot, whatever, you're dropping down and you're catching yourself.
Yeah. Well, listen, if you can't do a push-up, should we do a burpee? It's as simple as that. So Arson, that's an old classic. They'll hold off the back extension or GHR. What exactly? Where did you guys get that one from? Is that the McGill? McGill, is it another kind of McGill one, or where did you get that from? And exactly what is it? Why are we doing it?
That one, for fitness, we're looking for posterior chain endurance. So let's look at touch and go power cleans. If you're a purist in the sport of weightlifting, you probably won't do touch and go stuff. But if you're in fitness or CrossFit, anything like that, touch and go work is going to be there.
Drives them fucking nuts. So funny. They go mad. It's like, yes, this is CrossFit's a different sport.
Yeah, totally different sport. So we're just looking to see if you have, postural endurance, of your posterior chain. So if you lose it, say in the hamstrings, that tells me something different than if you lose it, say in the low back. So if I have somebody that their hamstrings were fine, but then they just, boom, they do this, then I know right out the gate, like, hey, you can't even control your body weight with your low back. Like maybe we don't do 5 rep max touch and go deadlifts or whatever. So that's what that's pretty much telling me. I don't have any data to show that it's going to necessarily prevent injuries in other sports, although I'm sure there might be. The original Sorensen, if I'm not mistaken though, was never done on a GHD. It was done where your ankles are actually strapped down onto a table, if I recall, but it's been a long time since I looked at that.
What's the time did you say you're looking at? 90?
2 minutes for that one.
Oh, 2 minutes. That's tough enough, I'd say.
Yeah. What's really interesting though is once you pass that and you graduate and you start doing like more deadlifts, power, clean, touch and go work, 6 months you come back, you may not actually pass it. So I'm not entirely sure what that means yet. Like I don't know if that necessarily means that we have to take away touch and go work. I think it could also just be a specificity of adaptation. Like let's be real, it's a very uncomfortable movement, like just to hang out there for 2 minutes.
Yeah, you get those people like moan about their quads. My quads are so... Shut up and just hold the position, will you?
So I mean, sometimes you have the strength, but it's like the mental side of it, you just give out.
Like, let alone using it as an assessment, it probably will be a very, very good accessory movement for people doing touch and go work.
Yeah, I have people I'll tell them, hey, accumulate 3 minutes or GHD hip extensions at 4-2-2-2 tempo. So 4 down, 2 pause, 2 up, 2 pause.
Screw your tempo.
Crushing. Yeah. Yep. Crushing people with it.
Yeah, you just see like on their workout sheet where the tempo is, and then the box beside it. Fuck you.
It's got to be a little bit of a heart. You got to put down the less than 3 symbol.
That's actually what I'm going to start doing. And instead of an X, put in heart 30 heart 0. Don't
right.
You just love it? Okay, last one then is. Oh, sorry. One thing I'm going to say there as well is. I wonder would it ever be worth doing like a unilateral version of that sourcing? You know, would one side, is there a big deficit between one side fatiguing more than the other? You know, so because I know Brett Contreras does a ton of like single leg back extension and back extension work. And if you've ever done that, oh my god, your posterior chain's on fire doing a single leg one.
Yeah, it lights you up. I don't have any data to show me where somebody would sit. Like I'd have to put thousands of people through it just to see, because is it 60 seconds? Is it 5 reps at a certain tempo? Like what correlates it? Because injuries are so incredibly complicated, there's no way we can really say like this is going to prevent a hamstring injury. We can only correlate it kind of to performance. Like every single person that hits these numbers tends to be able to do this. That's how I view it. Injuries are too complicated to say like this is going to prevent an ACL tear.
At Altus now, we did a ton of those single leg isometrics, and we did a lot of like play catches with them. So like, you know, you'd be in that Sorensen position, but one leg unilateral, and you'd have a plate, and you would just like let go of it and grab it real quick. It was basically Franz Bosch's co-contraction idea, you know. So again, this isometric nature of the hamstring, because again, a lot of the hamstring work we do in the gym is just like for years people are like, why are we getting hamstring injuries? Like, because nothing you do can replicate what it does in sprinting, so it doesn't carry over. So, you know, everyone just doing like leg curls and whatever else. Anyway, listen, we don't really know anything. We're best guessing everything. As James says, we really don't know anything yet. Okay, last one. Unloaded rear foot elevated split squat. Them damn Bulgarians. Mike, if Mike saw this and I said Bulgarian. He hates Bulgarian split squat. Rear foot elevated split squat. So why are we using that? What is it about that movement that you think is so important?
I think Boyle and I would see eye to eye on that with regards to like, hey, guess what? Sport is on one leg. So I want to see, can you control your body weight under some level of, you know, tension, just because gravity is pulling us down? So like the bilateral deficit, can you do it under control with good eccentrics? Just because deceleration is such a massive component to sport. So I want to see if you can do it without load. Now, as you graduate into level 3 and level 4, we're going to start looking at load and structural balance and whatnot. But when it comes to just looking at it from a pure movement perspective, if I look at your left leg, and let's say you're like me, I'm a goalkeeper, so I've kicked with my right leg my entire life. I can crush it all day on my left. The second you put me on my right, bad news bears. Like I'm all over the place. And so I want to see, can we have symmetry there? and then it just tells me, hey, this person is a running back and they cannot do it on their right leg, but they can do it on their left, that might actually mean something that we have to fix. So looking at the 90-90 split stance or inline lunge, that's one component. And then we graduate you into the rear foot elevated split squat because that's a little bit more challenging. It's a little bit more dynamic. The bench or the platform, whatever you're using, should start at the tibial tuberosity. But in training, it doesn't always have to be there. Just because people's, their pelvis is different. Not everyone can be so high up with their back leg. Some people only need to be at 6 inches, what have you. So it just, in training, we might change it up. But in the test, that's kind of how we standardize it. And then from there, we just want to see if you can control it for 8 reps at 3.0 XO tempo.
Sweet. Mike, that's all I have for you today. Last thing is, what are you reading right now? I know that you're, as you said, you're on your sort of break now from your pre-med, so you're not having to read as much research. What books are you currently reading right now or listening to?
Yeah, so I took this week off from reading anything just because I just finished writing a gazillion papers last week, so I wanted to give my brain a break. So I'm just listening to audiobooks, and I'm going through Ben Lynch's book, Dirty Jeans. So I went through it once a while back. I've heard him speak on multiple occasions, but it's one of those things where you learn a lot and then you apply a lot and then you go back and read or listen to again, and it means something a little different because you have a deeper breadth of knowledge. So I decided to go through it again this week, and it's been amazing how I'm like, oh yeah, like I remember that, but that's how I would apply it differently now. So Dirty Jeans, great book, fantastic book. Most of our nutrition stuff lines up with what he says as well. He talks a lot about chewing your food, making sure you're getting in adequate protein but not overeating protein, vegetables. It all lines up with good principles.
So listen, Mike, we'll get you back on. We'll go through move 3 and move 4 of the OPEX assessment from CCP1. Just one final thing. You said you're going to Australia. What's going on down there, just in case this comes out before you go out and some of the Aussies down there, maybe we get a chance to go to whatever you're doing?
Yeah, I have my seminar that I teach. So I teach coaches basically how to optimize performance through various means. So like looking at biomechanics. Well, what impacts biomechanics? There's a lot that can impact biomechanics. So in my seminar, I basically spend 2 days teaching coaches when to correct exercise or use corrective exercise and how to understand what you're really doing. So I essentially teach coaches in my seminar how to have even better detective skills. So they can optimize their program design process. They can understand how doing certain things with nutrition can actually change other aspects of their fitness. So it's basically a coaching seminar that lasts 2 days. It's 9 hours on a Saturday and a Sunday with an hour and a half lunch. And then I'll be out there for 2.5 weeks because I wanted to spend some time down under. And I wanted to go hang out with some of my Aussie clients that I don't really ever get to see. So made it a vacation.
What's the date?
I leave Arizona the 24th. I arrive there the 26th, and then I'll leave there on the 8th of August. And then I get back here on the 8th of August.
All right.
Total brain melt.
Yeah, this will be out well before that. So yeah. So for anyone who might be interested, sure you send me the details. I'll put them in the show notes.
Yeah, I will, definitely.
All right, sweet. All right, guys, thanks for listening or watching if you're watching this on the YouTube channel. From me, Robbie Burke from the OPEX Podcast, where the old fitness, as you can see here, is explained if you're watching this course. And from Mike Bann. So you can say goodbye there, Mike.
Yeah, thanks for listening, guys. Thanks for having me again, Robbie.
All right, no bother, but looking forward to catching up again soon. All right, guys, take care. Peace.
Cheers.